Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're here today with Holly Berkley Fletcher, author of a new book titled The Missionary Kids, Unmasking the Myths of White Evangelicalism, published by Broadleaf Books. Holly grew up as a white American child in Kenya, a doubting, struggling, fearful Christian with bold, unwavering evangelical missionary parents. As an adult, she has straddled the world of conservative Christianity and liberal academia, red states and blue states, flyover country and elite coasts, America and Africa. She can navigate a cocktail party or a tent revival, a mansion or a mud hut, in English or Swahili, which must be interesting. She used to feel she was without a culture, without a true home. She was a zebra without stripes, to use a traditional African metaphor. Her first act was as an academic historian of American history, specializing in the 19th century temperance movement. Her second act was as an African analyst for the CIA for 19 years. Her third act is as a writer and essayist, an observer of American religion and of life in general. You can learn more about Holly and all of her work at the website azebrawithoutstripes.com. So Holly, thanks so much for joining us, and many congratulations on all of your work.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
So first of all, what else would you like folks to know about you than what I kind of touched on briefly there?
Well, it's kind of even that introduction is kind of head spinning. Like I always joke like if only I could pick a lane, maybe I could be really great, but I haven't been able to do that. So I don't know. I'm just kind of all over the place. That's been my life and that's kind of my brand, I guess.
Well, one thing you have to tell us about, because none of us have experienced this, is what it's like to be in the CIA.
Yeah, so it was a great career and a great time, and I made, some of my best friends there. And at the end of the day, I feel like in life, it's all about the people, whatever you do and
Yeah.
wherever you are. And so that was definitely what I've carried with me. But I was an analyst, so I wasn't like a spy, I had some spy moments, I suppose, but analysts are pretty much nerds, desk nerds, and we write and brief we write on areas of specialty and write for and brief policymakers. And so for me, it was a joy to be able to feel connected to Africa, get to travel there periodically since I have a deep love for Africa. And, despite the agency's sometimes bad reputation and history, in the case of Africa, while I was working there, I always felt like American policy was aligned very well with the best interests of Africans. It was about promoting democracy and economic growth and humanitarian aims and peacekeeping and things like that. And so those were the issues that most of my work was geared towards. And, the bad guys that I sort of chased in writing, not literally, were, these dictators and warlords and people that are not good people and very bad for their people.
Mm,
So
mm.
I enjoyed being able to support America, but also feel like I was helping Africa as well.
That's very cool. Well, it's good to know. Good to hear that kind of,
But of course, the history is not great, admittedly.
well,
So,
I mean,
but there's been a lot
just
of
like everything
reform and
else.
change. Yeah, there's been a lot of reform and change. So.
Good, good. So let's get to your new book. As I mentioned, the title is The Missionary Kids, Unmasking the Myths of White Evangelicalism. What made you decide to become an author and publish a book like this?
Well, I've always loved writing and I've always done a lot of different types of writing, as an academic. I published an academic book a long time
Hmm.
ago on the temperance movement. That was my dissertation basically. And I obviously wrote quite a bit in the agency, a very different type of writing. And then I enjoyed writing creatively, just in my spare time. And so I've always loved writing and I always sort of dreamt of doing some sort of trade type of book. And then this evolved out of a memoir that I had written and hoped to publish. And I was advised that memoirs are hard to sell.
Yes.
And so I'm glad that this is the book that came out because it's a lot more relevant, and it's a lot more powerful, I feel like. And ultimately the memoir that I wrote, it makes the points better than my own story to include the stories of dozens of others. I feel like you don't have to trust me and my experience and observations. I'm joined by, these dozens of other missionary kids that I interviewed and surveyed, and their stories are in many cases way more powerful and illustrative than mine. So
I was really glad to hear that aspect of your book, that you'd done all that research, and gotten so much input from a wide variety of people.
yes, yes, that was important, very important to me because I knew the message, anything that's critical. Missions is in evangelicalism in particular, but even among, more liberal, progressive audiences, missions and missionaries are kind of a sacred cow. They're the heroic, here, central figures in an American Christian story. And so I knew that anything that was all critical, I better have the receipts. So.
Exactly.
I
So
feel like I do. I feel like I
yeah,
do.
yeah, I do. I think you did a great job with that. But I saw in the acknowledgement section that, Valerie Weaver Zurcher was your editor at Broadleaf, who I can't tell you how many of the books that she's edited have been
Yep.
subjects of my interviews. She's
She's a
done such a
power.
phenomenal job,
Yeah.
and Broadleaf in general. Um,
Hmm.
but I didn't know that Valerie was also a missionary kid herself, which I mean had to make it an interesting collaboration with you.
Well, she was briefly a missionary kid because her parents, I believe, left the mission field when she was quite young. So I
Okay.
think like 5 or so.
Ah,
So
okay.
it's not a huge part of her identity and story, but it was enough of that. I think that's why the book, given that I was really unknown when I was doing this pitching, that's what it caught her eye, I think, because of
Mm-hmm.
that, which was fortuitous. And so,
Yes.
and she, from the beginning, she really believed very much in the project and was wonderful to work with. So, but definitely her belief in the project was key for me.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. So, when I first saw the title, The Missionary Kids, I wasn't, okay, well, that's interesting. But then when I saw the subtitle, I got much more excited, Unmasking the Myths of White Evangelicalism. So, um, is that part of how you expanded it, to go from memoir to a focus on that?
Yeah, well, my memoir, the way it sort of shaped up over time was it evolved to a place where I was actually in real time sort of discovering my discontents and critiques of the movement and how it ties in with evangelicalism. So I knew that, sort of using missionary kids' stories as a way of critiquing white evangelical culture was going to be the sort of overall aim and purpose of the book. But the premise is that it's not that the book is not because, oh, missionary kids are so important and their stories are so interesting and so important. The sort of foundational assumption of the book is that they are really great sources of this enterprise and that this enterprise has been essential to the shaping of a white evangelical identity, and that that identity is and mission's central place in it, is it's a very inflated one, so this heroic sort of identity, which I see as very much connected to our current moment. I think one of the reasons why 80% of white evangelicals have supported the MAGA
Hmm.
movement is a sense that is an inflated sense of their own importance for the work of God and the importance of their control over American history and as and in broader strokes, God's role and God's work in history. And missions has been essential to that from the beginning. Their idea of this sort of grand endeavor that white American Christians feel that they have been given by God. And then also as a sort of escapist projection of the racial the racial problems in America and their own complicity in it. That has been a theme from the beginning that I bring out as well. And missions continues to be part of that story as well. The whole color blindness. Back in the 19th century, missions was a working out of the idea of the heathens and you know, if we can, and if we can save their souls, then we can abuse their bodies, and then in the current day when Christians are, well, nowadays the racism the abject racism has made a comeback, but among sort of the good evangelicalism, the whole colorblind notion and this idea of the global church and our participation in the global church and how that masks really ongoing control and arrogance there and an unwillingness to examine the history. So,
Well, so since most of us that are probably listening to this are not former mission kids, can you give us just a little bit of a flavor about some of the difficult situations that puts children in?
yeah. And again, the book details all of that, but the main point of the book is not that that this is like, oh, everybody should be completely absorbed with the travails of missionary kids. It's more to explode the myths that missions have served for white evangelicals. But yes, the book talks about um, parental neglect, abuse. There's some real structural problems about with accountability on the mission field, and missionary kids, or MKs as they're often known, are often the victims of that. The identity issues, growing up in a sort of bubble where you're not really part of a community, and there's real barriers to ever becoming part of a community and to sort of creating an identity that you can carry forward into your adult life. And then one of the universal themes of all the missionary kids that I speak to, and I spoke to a lot of missionary kids who are still very much evangelical, who are missionaries themselves or were missionaries themselves, who are sort of the true believer types. And these themes came out even in those stories. And the one that really came out across the board is the grief that we carry with us. It's a very particular kind of grief where you're grieving for not just a past or a lost love or a lost life. You're grieving for your own lost life, even as you have to reconstruct a new identity in a new context. The missionary kids' identities are sort of neither here nor there, and they are constructed in a highly specific environment. And so it's very hard to carry that forward into your life. It's not really transferable, and it's not something that, you can easily form relationships around. So the grief of the loss of self and the alienation, that's definitely something that came forward in all the stories that I
Mhm.
gathered.
So one of the things you say in the book is that no one thought to ask us if we were being abused. We were in the care of other missionaries. And well, you might as well accuse Jesus himself. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. White evangelicalism writ large. So I cite a psychologist in the book. His book really was influential in my thinking. His name's Dave Verhagen. I don't know if you know him, but he wrote a book called How White Evangelicals Think. And I mean, if you want to understand white evangelicals, it's like the book as far as I'm concerned. But what he identifies, and he has data to prove it, is he calls it collective narcissism of white evangelicalism. It's a culture that is built around a sense of a grand sense of self, an inflated sense of self, both spiritually and in every other respect. And when you have a culture like that, I think it's hard. I mean, we've seen this over and over, whether it's with regard to white evangelicals reckoning with race. Again, the construction of this colorblind narrative, and there is an ongoing attempt to not reckon with that. Or abuse, and we've seen this very much so in the Southern Baptist Convention, but in other evangelical areas, of just not being able to deal with any kind of abuse because it doesn't fit with that sense of identity. The fact that, there could be such flaws and such failures within this culture. It's not something that fits with the grandiose personality. And then if you're talking about missionaries, because missions has been the sort of next level of evangelical narcissism and sense of grandiosity. And so if you're dealing with missionaries abuse, that's like, cannot compute at all. And then on top of that, there are real structural and legal barriers to accountability on the mission field that I witnessed personally.
Well, certainly wouldn't be the only religious area that's been guilty of hiding abuse, but I totally get how that
Well, I
has.
do think a religious abuse, or again, any religion you're talking about, but especially any sort of fundamentalist religion that is so fixated on its own rightness and certainty, and that's sort of baked into the entire point of the faith. They're just it takes it makes the accountability so much more difficult,
Yeah, yeah, crazy. So the book is organized into 4 different sections, each one dispelling a different myth. Can you touch on those, please?
Yeah, so not these are myths about the mission field, but then writ large, they're stories that evangelicals tell themselves through missions and in other respects. So the first one is the myth of calling, and I'm not saying there's not any calling. I'm saying that calling is not a sense of calling is not inherently from a good place or should not be questioned or scrutinized, and that it shouldn't just be swallowed whole. So that's one. And then the myth of multiculturalism gets into the racial issues. And again, this idea of like missions as an expression of a global church, this sort of kumbaya view of race, when in fact, an escape, missions has been part of a fleeing of the race issue from the beginning. And so that's very emblematic of white evangelical identity. And then the myth of saints deals with all the abuse issues on the mission field and in white evangelicalism more broadly. And then the last one is the myth of indispensability. This idea that it has to be us, like we have to be the ones doing this, we have to be the ones in control. And again, you see this on the mission field and the continuing holding on to
Yeah.
structures and money and power within global evangelicalism, and the continued sending of missionaries to places that are actually very Christian already. And then you see it in the Christian nationalist narrative here in America, and this idea that we can't lose the culture, we can't lose the government, we can't lose the culture, we have to be in control. It has to be us, or God can't, Jesus can't handle it. Jesus can't function without us.
It's like the one of the other books that I interviewed was the Seven Mountains Mandate, about that whole, taking over the
Yeah.
seven mountains, as you said, of culture.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I always say about Christian nationalism, because I grew up squarely, my parents were Southern Baptist missionaries. I grew up squarely in sort of what would be considered the mainstream of white evangelicalism, not one of these fringe sort of movements. But I was raised with all of the messaging of Christian nationalism, except the last and most crucial and most dangerous piece, which has been the rejection of democracy.
Hmm.
And, that back when I was being raised, the assumption was that, we still have enough numbers and powers and access, like we can win this thing the right way. But as you've seen, evangelical numbers and influence in the culture, and frankly, racial white people's place in the culture decline over the last 20 years, democracy doesn't really work anymore for people with those assumptions. So I always say, like, I grew up, none of this Christian nationalism, it's very much in keeping with mainstream white evangelicalism. The only
Yeah.
difference is that we didn't storm the Capitol.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. Wow. So one of the little businesses I set up a while back is called Find Your Next Calling, to help other people, literally do that, find, a new calling for them. But I knew, and your book points out how dangerous, how helpful or how dangerous the whole sense of calling can be. I mean, do you see it that way?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm a huge believer in a healthy sense of calling. It's a question of where does it come from, you know? Like, does this come from, is this sense of calling a healthy outgrowth of, observing in your life your joys, your passions, your gifts, and that's a healthy sense of where you need to go and where do you need to invest yourself in life, or is it coming from a wounded place that tends, the outward expression of like again, in a narcissist, the grandiose personality is a cover for a deep sense of shame and self-loathing.
Mm,
And so I think what I've seen a lot, certainly on the mission field, is that people are running away from their wounds and their sense of shame, failure, and hurt by throwing themselves into this sort of grandiose sense of calling. And that just never, it doesn't matter if you're a missionary or not, if you're sort of operating out of fear and woundedness versus love and joy and good things, like it's just never going to end well. And if you're taking kids along for it, for the ride, then that's not going to end well for them. Um,
mhm,
so
mhm.
um, so yeah, it's not that I'm actually a big believer in calling. I mean, I felt called to write this book. I mean, some people would dispute that, and that's fine. They can dispute that, and the other thing is that a sense of calling is not sacrosanct. It doesn't mean that people can't question, your sense of calling or where it came from. I think
Mhm,
that's healthy.
mhm.
That's something that communities should do for each other.
So toward the end of the book, in a chapter titled Fighting for Change, you talk about efforts to change missionary culture. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that is in the Saints section. So it's geared more specifically towards abuse, and really it's been the missionary kids who have done this, and also a key change in U.S. law. So the first missionary kids who really spoke out about their abuse were a group who I interviewed and who I've gotten to know, and they're real heroes of mine. Were survivors of Mamu Academy in West Africa and endured horrific abuse. And so it was their stories that were really publicly known. They got national TV coverage by protesting outside of a large missions conference. And then out of that activity, they formed MK Safety Net, which is still a great organization that advocates and sort of keeps the conversation going around the issues of mission field abuse. So there certainly that movement and the work of missionary kids themselves has had an impact. But then also, I think, and this is just, I think it was not due to MK's that the law was passed, but in 2003, the PROTECT Act was passed, which allows U.S. citizens who commit child abuse overseas to be prosecuted under U.S. law.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
that is really key because before that, there was really no jurisdiction for crimes committed against children overseas.
mhm,
And given a lot of these countries where the abuse may take place have their own problems with child abuse and poor rule of law and forensic challenges and all kinds of problems with their legal systems, that those prosecute the people could get away with this kind of thing, and mission boards could sort of shuttle and did shuttle people home, and they went on with their lives without any repercussions.
mhm,
So after 2003 now, and missionaries have been prosecuted under this law, which was probably more geared towards sex tourism, and that kind of thing. But it just so happened that it was very fortuitous for mission field abuse.
mhm,
And so since then, missionary organizations and missionary schools for MKs, they've all developed child protective policy, some better than others, and some, it's all about the enforcement though, as the advocates will tell you, and a lot of times that's still lacking. And there's still enormous challenges surrounding accountability, but it's certainly much better than it was.
That's good. That's good. So I'd like to read from one of the excellent reviews of your book. This is from our author friend David Gushy, who says, this book is a must-read and a crucial addition to the post-evangelical literature that is rapidly growing these days. So you mentioned one other book, that in that vein that you really liked. Were there any others that you would like to recommend?
Yeah, well, my sort of model, because I'm a historian and I by training, and I definitely wanted to root these more contemporary missionary kids stories and these sort of myths in the history. And so I did bring in a lot of academic stuff. So my model in sort of bringing the past to life in a new relevant way was, of course, Kristen Dumay's Jesus and John Wayne. But some books that may not be as aware of. I think everyone and their dog has read that one. But I mentioned Dave Verhagen, how white evangelicals think, as being really crucial to how I processed all of this. I also would recommend, if you're looking for missions, in particular on something on missions, Mektis Haddis, who is an Ethiopian American author and consultant and has worked a lot in the missions world. She has written a book called A Just Mission, where she gets into some of the racial issues and multicultural issues and has more concrete advice. There's a book, I cite a missiologist, an African missiologist, Harvey Kuyani. He has just come out with a book called Decolonizing Missions, which is kind of, it's a lot of history in particular, but it's along those same lines. So those are a few of the books that were really influential for me in getting this one together. And then I cite a lot of huge academic literature as well.
Cool, cool. So what would you want readers to most take away from the book?
Yeah, so I would hope that, and I know this is happening, which gratifies me a lot because I've heard from a lot of missionary kids, but also missionaries or just evangelicals. I think most American Christians, certainly most white evangelicals, put missions and missionaries on a pedestal and don't really want to like examine them. And then even as white evangelicalism has been sort of dragged through the mud in the last 10 years because of its association with the MAGA movement and Christian nationalism, many sort of non-MAGA Christians or like less MAGA Christians have held missions up as like, okay, yeah, but see, look at all the good work that we're doing. And so I would just challenge, I just would, the point of the book is not to tear down the work that missionaries are doing per se, but to examine the ways that the celebration of missions has been a real blind spot for white evangelicals and continues to be. And so I'm not here to like say missions are always terrible and we shouldn't do them anymore. I don't think that's my role, but to in sort of re-examining them to get people to look at themselves really as American Christians. And I think there's a lot of lessons here for more progressive Christians as well, how we engage in, charity, how we view the objects of our charity, how our good works can blind us to ourselves and create a sense of ego that isn't healthy and good. So I think there's a lot of there's a lot of harsh reality here for white evangelicals, but I think there's lessons for us all, a calling as well, like how, what to look at when you feel called to do something, like maybe take another look at that. Look at that closely and critically. It's not
Mhm,
a carte
mhm,
blanche.
mhm. So I know you've been in the middle of launching this great new book, but I have to ask you if there's any future books or other kinds of projects that you are able to tell us about.
Well, I've really been working on my Substack, which I write usually, well, the holidays has really thrown me off course, but I try to write twice a week, and it's a mix of things. I do some humor writing on there because I love humor writing, and I think we all need some humor in our life. So I usually try to do one post a week that's humor, and then the other is, a mixture of things. I'm really engaged in what it means to live through this moment. I feel like the love of democracy has been probably the dominant theme of my life. I've seen it from all angles as a little girl growing up in a dictatorship, as an analyst, as a historian, and then, working for the U.S. government. So I'm particularly freaked out on a number of levels by what's going on under this administration, which is worse this time than it was last time. And so I'm out there. I've been to a lot of protests this year. I'm looking for ways all the time to contribute, not just to the dialogue, but to the work. I volunteered for the Spanberger campaign here in Virginia, where I live, and I've just been kind of throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall this year. I left the agency a year ago, and I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to be when I grow up. But I know that whatever I do, I want it rooted in this fight to preserve our democracy.
Yeah.
And so I'm writing a lot about that. I'm writing a lot about what it is to be a Christian in this moment. I really feel strongly that those of us who are not MAGA Christians and need to really double down on our faith and to not let them have it, So I write about all those things. And I'm thinking of my next book project, but I only have a concept of a plan.
That's fine. That's fine. Um, Good. Well, Holly, I really appreciate you joining us and doing all this hard work, to bring this issue to light, which I think you've done incredibly effectively. And I hope that more people get a deeper understanding of the issue through you. So thank you for
Thank you
that.
so much for having me.
So again, the title of the book is The Missionary Kids, Unmasking the Myths of White Evangelicalism. And check out Holly's website, azebrawithoutstripes.com. Holly, thanks again and best wishes.
Thank you so much. Merry Christmas.